All right, so here we go. Just going to show you how to bring some stuff in, either from the asset store or from your computer. So really quickly, I could click on the asset store tab. You can always open the window if it's not open at the moment. But here's my asset store tab. A really easy one to get started is 2D Sprites Pack. It's made by Unity. It was one of their first asset packs. You just click on it. It's totally free. I'm going to click on download. It'll download pretty quick. I click on import, which actually, after downloading it onto your computer, installs it or brings it into your package. Okay. And once I bring this in, what this will do is this will create a folder down here in my project. So I can go back to my scene, back to my world. Nothing changed. I have currently one scene, nothing else, just the camera and the scene, which is the default. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open this folder down here, and it brought in a bunch of new pictures. So I'll do something like I'll bring this ball in. Now it's saying I can't bring it into there because that's where the player is. I'm going to look at the actual world. So I'm going to drag my ball, and I could just put it right there. Or I could drag it into the hierarchy, which then it goes to 0, 0. The ball I put in is at negative 0.3 and 1.7. Notice that the Z is 0, although I can change the Z. That's going into and out of the screen. For the most part, that doesn't change anything, except if I go far enough and it gets behind the camera, when I go to play mode, it doesn't show up. So sometimes things you think are in the scene are not showing up. It has to do with the Z value. So apparently our camera, I could check, is at a Z value of negative 10. This ball keeps disappearing. Whoops, this ball right here keeps disappearing when I go behind negative 10, because now it's behind the camera. So although it exists in the world, I can't see it. We'll talk more about this later. So you can drag things either into the scene view or into the hierarchy here. I'm just going to keep one of those. I'll delete the other. This one, there's all sorts of things I can do with it. So I can take its position over here in this transform, which has its position, its rotation, and its scale, and I can change any one of these. Two of the rotations we won't really play with. The X rotation won't really make sense in a 2D world because it's rotating into a 3D world. Let's undo that with just Control Z. Over here, rotating the Y, again, that doesn't really make sense in a 2D world. So I'm going to Control Z, but the Z is the one going in and out of the screen. So if I rotate around that, imagine I have a stake going right into the game object, into my screen. As I spin around that, that's exactly the spin I'm looking for. So we will use the Z rotation. And then you can change the position either by hard coding a number, 1, or by clicking on the X and then sliding it. And that's often really helpful to do. So I'll position it. You can also go up here to the gear and just click on reset. And that sets everything back to zeros and then the scale to 1. And I can always change the scale so it stretches. Notice that when I went negative, it flipped around. 0 scale would be 0 width. And so again, I'm just going to reset it back to 1. All right, so I'm going to place a couple things in here. Oh, and up here on the left, I can do things like the hand lets me move around. The sizing, or I mean the moving tool, lets you go up and down if you grab an arrow. If you grab in the middle here, you can go in both directions, or you can grab the red one, just go side to side. Rotation, again, I can just grab this and rotate it. If you grab the wrong axis, oh, that didn't do it. Sometimes, yeah, now it's rotating in the wrong direction. So sometimes with rotation, I find it easier, especially in 2D, just to deal with this rotation rather than the rotation tool. But in 3D, the rotation tool can be really useful. And then the scale tool is where, again, you can either scale this side, you can Control Z that, scale just this direction, or you can grab in the middle and you can go in both directions at the same time to change the scale. So let's leave the ball a little bigger. That sounds good. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a couple more things in. So let's bring in some grass. I'm going to stretch it out to the side because I'm still on the scale tool. I'm going to stretch it down a little to make it thinner. Now I'm going to go to the move tool, and I'm going to grab this and I'm just put it down towards the bottom of the screen. I want there to be a nice background, so I'm going to drag a background in. But notice now, okay, what the heck? It's totally covered up everything. So if I go to my game view, all I see is the cloud. And I obviously want to see my ball in the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the sorting in layer. Now this doesn't have anything to do with like the physics or the interaction of game objects. This is totally just the sprite renderer. So the sprite renderer is just saying, what do you want to show up on the screen? Like, how do you want this thing to be drawn? This has nothing to do with physics or colliding or anything else. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, it's in the default layer. And I could add a layer. I could say, you know what? I'm going to make something called the background, and I'm going to make something called the foreground. Okay. And now what I can do, and now notice I'm in a totally different place. So I didn't add or switch the layer of that object. I'm just creating new layers. So what I'm going to do is go back over to my sky sprite, and I'm going to set, I want that to be in the background. Then I'm going to go over to your default sprite, and I'm going to set it to foreground. And now it shows up in front, because when I went to the tags, notice if I go to the sorting layers again, whatever's first gets drawn first, and then after gets drawn second, so it shows up on top. So if I put things in the background, they'll get drawn first, and then foreground will get drawn after. Now something else I can do is if I go over here to the ball sprite, and let's say I put it in the background. So it's on the same layer as the sky. The sky is in the background over here, notice. And if I click on the ball, it's in the background. But even in the same layer, I can go down here to order and layer and say, when do I want it drawn? Well, I want the sky drawn first, so I'm going to put that at 0. And then after the sky, I want the ball drawn next, so 1. So I could do it that way, but obviously better in this case is to put it in the foreground. But now that I have two things in the foreground, maybe I want the ball to be behind the grass. And so that's where I could say, I want the ball to be at 0 in the foreground, so drawn first, and then I want, even though it's in the foreground too, I want the grass to get drawn after, so it kind of covers the bottom of the ball as the ball rolls. Okay, so now we've got things showing up just like I want. I'm going to go back to the scene view, but when I press play, it'll switch me back to the game. Absolutely nothing happens, because I didn't tell anything to happen. All I did was tell things transform, where to go, and then sprite renderer, what to look like. But so yeah, they have a position and they have an image, but there's nothing else. All right, and before we go any further, let me show you. You could just go to Google here. I'll just open a new window, and I could just Google, I don't know, ball sprite. Okay, and I'll go to images, and I'll just grab any image. Like, wow, that looks so cool. It's got a transparent background. That's nice. I'm just going to save that image. Okay, let's save it to my desktop. Let's call it awesome looking ball. Okay, so boom, saved it to my desktop. Now what I can do is I can just grab this awesome looking ball and I can drop it right into the scene. Okay, and boom, there it is again because of the layering in the background. So let's put this in the foreground so it shows up, and whoa, that's crazy big. So we have a couple ways to change that. I could also drag this over to assets. Notice it automatically popped up here. I could have just dragged this and put it into the assets. That doesn't put it into the scene, but now I have it in my collection that I could drag it in anytime I wanted. So I just want to show you it's that easy. But what I'm going to do now, because that looks freaking crazy big. So one thing I could do is I could change the scale. I could be like, you know what, I don't know, 0.2, and I want to keep the scale the same. So I'm going to 0.2, 0.2, and even though the Z doesn't matter, I'm going to change that too. Okay, so I could do it that way. But instead, I'm going to go ahead and reset this. So it goes to 0, 0, scale 1, 1, 1. And instead, I'm going to click on the actual ball. And here's all the settings about where it gets imported. The main thing is what type. It's a sprite. It's a 2D image. Okay, so I pick that. Next thing is pixels per unit. Is basically saying what resolution you want to draw it as. So if I select a different number, so I don't know, let's go 200. And then click apply. What that's going to do is that's going to render it a higher resolution. So it's going to draw that same number of pixels in a smaller spread. So you know what? That's not the right size. So this, now my scale is still 1 to 1. And that's what you want, is the thing you put in, you want it to be the size you want. So you don't want to be dealing with the wrong scale and flipping it around. So let's set it to, I don't even, let's get crazy and go 500. Okay. Great. That's perfect size ball for me. You know what? Actually, let's go more like 700. That just sounds better. Okay, there we go. So now it's the perfect size for me, okay? And I'm going to leave this beach ball in there right now, okay? I'm going to also reset its position and transform, and notice it even reset its scale. That's totally okay with me. I'm going to move this over here. Now I want to move these balls around. Okay, actually, you know, I'm going to put this ball underneath. I like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some basic forces to this. I'll make a separate video where I go into detail, but really quickly, now that I've dragged some stuff into my scene, I'm going to click on this, and over here I can add any components I want. the first component, which is the nicest. I was doing with networking last. So let's just go to Physics 2D, click, and I'm going to pick Rigid Body 2D. You could also just, up here, you could just type, click here and go Rigid Body. The one without the 2D, that's for a 3D world. The mechanics won't work right in a 2D world. So I'm going to click on Rigid Body 2D. And now when I click play, I was selecting on the awesome ball. So over here, it now has a place. It looks like something, and now it has gravity. So I can just click play, and my ball falls. Okay. Doesn't hit anything though. So if we want to interact with other stuff, what we need to add to it is a collider. That's essentially saying, don't just do the calculations to move it with gravity, like actually give it a container or a collider or a body so it can bump into things. And so we'll give it a collider. Again, you can just go to Physics 2D, or you can type in collider. The ones without 2D are 3D things. So a box is a 3D cube that you can then change to be a rectangular prism. Box Collider 2D and Circle Collider 2D are the only ones I would recommend using right now. They're super efficient in terms of computation, so they won't slow your game down. And for all intents and purposes, even a crazy shaped cool character can be approximated with a circle, a box, or maybe a 2D capsule collider is a good shape for a player. Okay, so for this one, obviously I'm going to pick a circle. I'm in my scene view, and dang, that did a really good job. If it didn't look right, I might go over there and I might say, I want to tweak, like this is actually the body. Or maybe I want to put it inside a little bit. So it kind of like seems like it overlaps a little when it hits, but you can click on Edit Collider and change its size however you want. Now, of course, in game view, you won't see that because the player doesn't see that. But in scene view, you can change the collider however you want. Now, when I click play, still doesn't bump into anything, right? It's got a body. It can hit into things, except there's nothing else in the scene that has a body or a collider. So I'm going to click on, it's clicking on grass. So I'm going to click on grass right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I want to add a collider to this, box 2D. But notice this box is way up here, right? Like that's the box, even though the grass is down here. And for moving around really easily, I click on my middle mouse scroller to move. And my scroller in and out is how I zoom in and out. And that way I can move over, zoom in, zoom out, move over, and then I can click wherever I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit that collider. I'm going to say my grass is not up there. My grass is down here. And I could put the grass collider down here. So when I click play, this ball falls. It lands there because that's where I told it the collider edge was. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to edit the collider up to here. And one more thing I want to show you is as you put this in, okay, so that's a perfect spot. Now I'm going to hit play mode, okay, and while it's playing, I can go over here to the scene view, and I can say, you know what, I just don't like that collider. So click on grass sprite, edit the collider. I'm going to say I want the collider to be up here. And notice while in play mode, I can just muck around with this. But if I put the collider up here and exit play mode, the collider resets. So anything you do in play mode doesn't get saved. It's a good way for you to literally play with the values. Like maybe your forces for running aren't right. You're like, oh, there's a little more, a little less. Rather than clicking play, and especially on a slow computer where it takes a while. My computer's pretty peppy, and this is a small project, so it loads pretty instantly. Sometimes on a slower computer, a bigger project, that can take like 10 seconds for that to load and really start playing. And then you have to maybe navigate to the place where you were jumping, so it's much easier to, while in there, just literally be like, you know what? I don't like that spot. I'm gonna move it over here. What's that like? Ooh, and maybe I want to move it up, and maybe I want to, I don't like the collider on that circle. I just want to tweak it a little bit bigger, like, ooh, that seems just right. And it's behind the grass, which I kind of like, but you know what? I want the grass's collider to just be a little bit higher. Ooh, that looks just now like that, like just the edge of it's underneath. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to rotate. You know what? Instead of the rotation tool, I'm just going to go over here to the Z. So I click on the grass, I click on the Z, and in the transform, I can just whoa, whoa. But then as soon as I exit play mode, all that gets reset. Okay? So just wanted to show you that. Hopefully you enjoyed the second video.